Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Started by a group of citizens in a small Michigan town with a like-minded goal
of increasing the visibility
of the unseen and unheard populations in our community.
Our guests will share stories and insights
with the goal of increasing our awareness and knowledge
of various aspects of diversity and equity
to create a more connected, empathetic, and inclusive community.
So, let's get to work.
Let's get to work.
So let's get to work.
So, let's get to work.
Let's get to work.
Welcome back to the Visibility Project podcast. I'm your host, Jeremiah Lee. Spearheaded by the members of the Cultural Awareness Coalition, the project is the brainchild of several organizations and individuals with shared values who sit on a project steering team. We hope that the podcast series creates a deeper empathy for others and serves as a catalyst for people to actively create a more inclusive community and world. In our first podcast of 2021, we will be continuing the conversation around the topic of Islamic faith, stereotypes Muslims face, and the responsibility all of us hold for creating a more inclusive community. We will be chatting with two of our neighbors who will share their stories and experiences as practitioners of Islam. Julie Christensen, who converted to Islam, and Imam Safwan, who is a passionate leader in the community. Imam Safwan was born and raised in Quincy, Massachusetts. He holds a master's degree in Islamic Studies and Leadership with a specialization on philosophy of religion. He also holds bachelor degrees in economics and women gender studies. He is currently the religious director of the Islamic Center of Saginaw, Michigan. Julie Christensen was born and raised in Michigan. She is married with 2 children. She has been teaching Spanish and history for 20 years, with 13 of them as a college professor. She also had the opportunity to teach in Kuwait for a year. She enjoys traveling, reading, and spending time with her family. Well, welcome, Julie and Imam Safwan. We're so happy to have you here. So thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
All right. So let's go ahead and get started. So I want to ask each of you, and I'm going to start with you, Julie. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, about what you're passionate about, and can you tell us a little bit about your beliefs?
Sure. Born and raised Michigander. I've been teaching for 20 years, also taught like 13 years at the community college level. I teach Spanish and history. So if you ask my students what my passion is, it's marking their papers wrong. But that is not my real passion is teaching. I really enjoy being an advocate for our students, getting them experiences and opportunities. So those are really where my passions lie. I love spending time with my family and all the good stuff, and reading and traveling is a big thing for me. Passionate about working with our youth. So that's pretty much sums me up. I don't think there's anything too complicated there.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And I'm going to ask the same questions to you, Imam Safwan. So tell us about yourself and what you're passionate about and your beliefs.
Yeah. So we begin with the name of God, the most merciful. I'm from Quincy, Mass. If you're not from the area, usually just say Boston, Mass. So I'm from Boston, right? Yeah, born and raised. My parents are from Lebanon originally. I got 6 siblings, so we're 7 altogether, 5 girls, and then me and my brother came at the end. So they passed down a lot of wisdom to us. My father is an Imam as well, so I learned a great deal from him. I also studied with a lot of scholars of the Islamic tradition, as well as my academic background as well. So I've been studying this religion for maybe 15 years. But, my background's in economics and business administration, finance. So that was, growing up, I even worked as a real estate at one point. So my career background was going one way, but my passions and hobbies, working as a youth director part-time, etc., were in religion, we're in Islam and the community. So yeah, I have a wife and I have a small daughter. She's 4 years old. And actually we're expecting in 2 weeks.
Congratulations.
So
Thank you. But yeah, I would say that life and beliefs are, kind of two separate questions. So should I start part 2 of the belief question, or?
Maybe we can dig that out. I'm actually interested to hear a little bit more about your journey becoming an imam, and maybe for our listeners to tell a little more background about that. Like, can you tell us a little bit about what is an imam? What does it involve? And I guess, what is your life now what is your life like now that you are one? I know that wasn't necessarily the path your career path initially. So that's really interesting, but what's your life like that now? And what does your responsibilities as an imam involve?
So it involves quite a few things. To be frank, it's a bit of a Swiss Army knife. You really do have to dabble in almost all things, but the main realities are, leading the daily prayers. So Muslims congregate daily. We Muslims pray 5 times a day, but we congregate 3 times a day. So we congregate in the early morning, and then sunset, and then late night. There are 2 prayers during the day as well, but most people are working. But we offer congregational prayers 3 times a day. And then we also have the Friday a sermon, right, which is kind of similar to, in a sense, the Sunday Mass or Shabbat of the Jews. So that's our day of congregation, where in Saginaw, I guess pre-COVID, that's our new historical...
Right. It's a new era. It's a new era.
New era, right? 1 PC, pre-COVID. We would get around about 100 to 150, sometimes 200 on the Eid prayers, which are 2 times a year. Those are like our holidays, basically. Then you're getting a lot of people even up from kind of northern Michigan. A lot of people will come because this is, this and Midland are really the northernmost established Islamic communities of Michigan.
Really?
The other thing is that many mosques, especially mosques with smaller communities, they really only have 1 employee. So I feel like partly some of my work would more so be called a type of executive director type thing.
Interesting.
But it has an element of, conducting religious rituals and all of that as well. In addition to chaplaincy, visiting people in the hospital, visiting the sick, pastoral counseling, right, for youth, for couples, so doing a lot of counseling, tons of emails and messages. Can I eat this? Can I do this? What do I do when I'm traveling? What do I do when I'm, so constant communication. I probably spend at least 2 hours a day just handling text messages and emails and stuff. There's a lot of jokes out there, like what the community thinks the imam does, and like what the imam's wife thinks he does.
So you think of the memes.
Like the memes, like what the imam actually does.
I had no idea how many hats you had to wear in this role. So that's amazing to be able to balance that much and be the point person for support for so many people in the community. So
yeah,
I can only imagine the amount of responsibility that you have to take on for this. So I'm going to shift gears to you, Julie, actually. I'm gonna, you're not getting
the other.
So you, correct me if I'm wrong, you converted to Islam, correct?
Yeah. Yep. I'm a revert.
So I want to ask first, did you grow up practicing another religion?
I joke that I can pretty much get myself in trouble with all religions. So I grew up in like elementary school. My mom and her sister were Jehovah's Witnesses. So I grew up there, and then that didn't stick for my mom. And then my dad and my grandparents all took like an active role in getting us to their churches. So I went to the Baptist church and the Methodist church and a Lutheran church. Then my dad married my stepmom, and she's Catholic. So I had this huge exposure at a young age to a lot of different religions, but I really started to question what it was that I believed in. And when I met who would eventually be my sister-in-law, but I met my sister-in-law who was Muslim, and then I met this wonderful person from Malaysia, and I started to learn about Islam. Things just appealed to me, that there was a relationship between you and Allah, and it was, you were responsible for your own actions, and building this relationship. And to me, that made all the sense in the world. It wasn't about like where I was practicing my religion. It was that I was trying to make a connection. And that's what would happen, is that I met my husband, got married, and converted to Islam, but I had been on that journey for a couple of years beforehand. So it wasn't a big stretch for me.
Did you, was it difficult for you when you were, first started dating and you were still on this path to conversion? Was it difficult for you, like, as someone of a different faith at the time, or you're on that path at the time? Was it difficult for you? And then also, I guess, what was your family's reaction after converting?
Yeah, it was, definitely the American idea of dating, getting to know somebody, falling in love was not my husband's experience. He's Palestinian, born and raised Muslim. They don't, dating was not a thing. I was not going to get, when he made the commitment to get married, and then eventually wanted to meet me, his idea was already there, that there's a marriage thing. And I was like, oh, you are out of your mind. Like, I don't even know what is going on with you. My daughter loves that story, by the way. But it was a different process, but I think I was in the right place in my mind and in my heart for that to happen. But I think you had to let go of a lot of assumptions about what you had been raised with,
Sure.
It could be something basic, like women changing their names, like as a Spanish teacher, I know that in the Spanish speaking world, women don't change their names, but in the Arabic speaking world, women don't change their names either. So it was like this kind of odd thing that I'm not going to be Mrs. Dabbas, right? My students will call him Mr. Christensen. He's like, oh, no, that's not it, So that was hard. Family members varied. They varied. So some people were super supportive from day one, knowing and trusting my decisions. Others were, this is post 9/11, and others really believing a lot of the stuff that they were hearing in the news and the media about what Muslims were.
So may I ask, do you have kids now?
Yeah. I have two. I have
go ahead, please.
Son and a daughter.
What was it like raising kids, maybe with your family who maybe didn't convert to Islam, and you did, and trying to navigate, family having different religious backgrounds or different beliefs, and then you having an Islamic faith, with raising kids and how navigating that?
What I think, and Umberine hit it really well in your podcast last time, is that there's respect for all people of the book. So even if I don't see the respect from my family and friends, but I do. I mean, like in most cases I do. The reality is that I respect their beliefs, and we work really hard to make that a piece of it, because we do respect people of the book. We do respect Christianity and Judaism. And so that for me was never an issue. We've got a lot of cultural differences too, because my husband's family is Palestinian, and then my family is Michiganders. Like we don't vary a whole lot. I tease that we have like family down south. I have family here, and we could have cultural differences, but this stuff tends to be a little bit bigger. But it's doable. We make it work.
Great. Thanks for that. So you mentioned Umberine in our conversation in our last podcast. One topic that we briefly touched on was talking about women in Islam. So I want to ask both of you about your perspectives on this. So what do you both think about, what are some of the common misconceptions that people have about Islam and women?
I'll let Julie start.
Oh, I was going to say it.
Expert here.
I'll wait. No, and she hit a lot of them before your last, and both of them did on your podcast. they talked about, women just wearing a scarf don't have rights or are quiet or passive. Those kinds of things I think are challenging to get people to understand that this is a choice, that what you see in other places where the government dictates the religion, you have different issues. But here, for me, it's a choice to wear the hijab, just like it's a choice to not wear the hijab. And that's something that we struggle with. But I think that's one of the misconceptions, is that the minute they can identify you as a Muslim and as a Muslim woman, the assumption is somehow you're oppressed and you can't speak for yourself. And, some of the biggest advocates I know are for a lot of social change are Muslim women, and they're their own powerhouses. And I think that's one that is challenging to get across to the general population, because the minute you cover your hair or your body, you're somehow being oppressed. So I think that is one of the big ones for Muslim women.
Imam Safwan, do you have anything else to add on this topic?
I don't know. Sometimes I guess I feel like I live in a bubble, and I forget that people are still being extremely bigoted and hateful towards women who wear headscarves. And I just find that boggling, at least from a historical standpoint, because, the foundations of this very country, whether we're going to talk about the Puritans or the Pilgrims, or whether we're going to talk about, Victorian society, there were always people who embraced a great deal of modesty in their dealings. Americans are familiar with nuns. They're familiar with women who cover themselves. But at other times, I forget that this is the type of political situation we live in, where, the day-to-day realities of life, of whether, a woman wears a scarf or not, is all of a sudden politicized and then weaponized to dehumanize and devalue the lives of real people. And I think just from a human standpoint, that only tells us that humanity has forgotten what it means to be human. And that's what concerns me. Just in general, I think it's quite easy for those who wish to be educated and who wish good for each other to learn, what they need to do to support each other.
Just yesterday, I'll just throw this in there because that was a great comment. Yesterday, I was getting my COVID vaccine shot because I'm a teacher and I got to sign up for it. And those lovely healthcare workers that were just lined up at our airport getting us all through. One of the women had come and asked me about, like, how much longer do you have? Because you had to wait 15 minutes. And she said, can I ask you about your scarf? Like, what's it called? And I thought, oh, it's a hijab. And, and so we had like a quick minute conversation, and it was super nice. I said, is that what you wanted to know? You want to know what it was called and why I wear it? Yeah, that was it. And she was really just kind and nice. And I just absolutely respect the fact that she was willing to put herself out there and ask a question that a lot of people just aren't comfortable with. So, and I think that's part of what we have to do. We just have to be able to have those conversations. And even if it's just a quick couple-minute conversation and they ask a question about it, they deserve our utmost attention. Being able to do that is important.
Yeah, I think that's great that she did ask that question, and rather than to make an assumption about why you would wear it or what it is, then actually asking. So I think that I applaud her for that. So
it was awesome.
And the other thing that we need to understand is that feminism is about the right to self-determination, right? So if you're going around then telling women what they need to do, you're oppressing them. Right. So women need the right to self-determination. They don't need to tell you that they need to take off their scarf or put it on. None of that is anyone's business. Right. If we're being a proper, democratic republic, a proper plural society that respects human beings.
Thank you both for that. And I want to continue this conversation a little bit about, common misconceptions. So are there some other misconceptions about Islam that frustrate you?
Julie, feel free.
No, you go first this time.
I mean, obviously, there's a great deal of misconceptions concerning Islam. You know, if you Google Islam, you're going to get like Jihad Watch, and you're going to get like all these, you know, tin hat, you know, type conspiracies going on. And that everyone thinks that they can talk about Islam. Islamophobia, you know, creating fear of Islam is $1 billion industry. So it's not just about, hey, you know, Islam, we need to, you know, get the truth out. It's also about the fact that people are making money off of furthering this idea of Muslims being terrorists, furthering this idea of, hey, we have to watch out for Muslims. They're always trying to, you know, organize and undermine democracy. And there are, you know, ulterior motives and agendas and, you know, all of these things that people definitely, I would say to some extent, are reading and consuming. But unless all of us know how to work in a collective against ignorance, right, then it doesn't matter who, you know, the victim is, whether it's Islam or whether it's, you know, the Black community or what minority it may be, whether it's, you know, tribal law and Native Americans and, you know, whether it's environmentalism and the destruction of, you know, our natural resources. I mean, all of these things are problems of ignorance. And so we need to learn how to educate one another and understand that there are such things as differences of opinion. And there are such things that are blatantly destructive, right? And people of sense need to have courage to speak the truth.
And I agree. I think there's a lot of things that do and can get frustrating, kind of overwhelming, especially when you feel like it's somehow, as a Muslim, somehow my job to make the apologies, to do the explanations, to put myself out there. But I think for me, the biggest frustration is just what our kids face, and they're getting a lot of that same imagery. They're getting and hearing that from the kids in their schools. I teach in a small rural community, and my daughter's the only Muslim other than her mother, the teacher. So my daughter has zero filter. She has no concept of what this means to be embarrassed by or concerned with. But she did. I mean, she has experienced that already, and she's only in the 5th grade. And how she handles it, I think, is really important. So I think as a mom, really, my job is to get her positive images and positive people around her that she knows when she gets confronted with these things, that she has at least the tools to not let it destroy her or to take it to heart. Because that's what's frustrating for me, is that we can keep saying this. I can have family members post stuff on social media where I'm like, oh, seriously, did you really think that's what I believe? Like, is that really what you think I'm teaching my kids? And I'll send them messages like private. I don't like the whole Facebook fighting thing kind of stuff, but I'll send them private messages like, I'll be willing to talk to you. I'll tell you what my thoughts are, or I'll get you in contact with somebody who can tell it better than I can. Like, I'm not the expert, but you know, I think you're right that they've chosen not to listen and not to read and not to have that intellectual challenge. And so I think if we're not going to be, you know, responsible for changing the American ideal, we actually have to change it within our house and just make sure that our kids and our community are supported.
And I think you're both absolutely correct that, you know, it's almost like an echo chamber where people will hear these, you know, misconceptions, and that's what their social media feeds will be. And then they're reinforcing these ideas upon themselves when, if they have these conversations like with you, Julie, or you, Imam, Safwan, and maybe they learn that this is step outside this their own constructed viewpoints, and don't just Google Islam and see the first thing is about Islam and jihad, or more reinforcing Islamophobia. So, as there times then trying to create a more welcoming, inclusive world, and you know a more thoughtful and warm world, is there times where, you have felt welcomed in non-Islamic settings? And then conversely, is there times that in the community that you have felt discriminated against? I'm going to start with you, Julie, on this one. Is there times that you have felt discriminated against, and there are times that you have just been opened in inclusivity and open arms in our community?
Well, I'm going to talk about some recent events. So we had the awful flooding in Sanford and Midland, and our interfaith group in Midland just really stepped up. Breen and Haley and just everybody stepped up to help the community. And it was wonderful to have opportunities to give back and to be seen. I think much like this podcast where we're being heard and talked about, I think that helps to diffuse some of those myths and some of those stereotypes and prejudices, because we were, helping people through this devastating event, and it felt very welcomed. It didn't matter that people were wearing hijabs or not. They were pulling out the same amount of wet awfulness and people's memories and all of the stuff out of their flooded basements. And I mean, I didn't do it as often as some people, but just seeing that and having those members and those community members being so thankful that we were there and we were helping. It didn't matter what religion you were all helping to get through this devastating event. And that was nice. I will say right now, like I have not had any, even though I work in a small rural community, I haven't faced any like open discrimination about being Muslim. It just hasn't happened. So that's been nice. I think they've known me long enough that they know they like me or they don't like me with or without the hijab. So I think that's fair enough to say. But I think, it just is challenging. And yes, we have faced discrimination. I will say quite a few years ago, when my husband and I were first married, we had an incident with a hate crime. And he had been taking his parents to the University of Michigan for some healthcare issues. And some guy tried to run him off the road because he saw that his mom was wearing a hijab and his dad was wearing his Palestinian clothing. And the guy tried to write him off the road. He was caught eventually. It was a really traumatic experience. So we've all had those instances. I mean, I shouldn't say we've all had those instances, but we have those where it is kind of debilitating and we kind of just want to shut our doors and stick within our communities. But I think doing things like what the Islamic centers are doing with the interfaith groups, I think we really need to get out there and break those stereotypes, let people say, well, all the Muslims might be like that, but Julie's different. I know one person who's a Muslim and she's not like that. So maybe that starts to break a stereotype. Or unfortunately, the reverse could happen. I could be reinforcing one, but my students like, she's so awful on tests, something like that. But I think the reality is that we just need to get out there, and be willing to have those hard conversations. But sometimes it really is daunting, and you just want to stay in your house and stick with your community and just pretend that the bubble exists. And it's, there's some comfort in that. I think sometimes we do need just to be with our families and friends to feel that support.
What can community members do and individuals do to make to create a more inclusive environment, for Muslims, but for others as well? What are your thoughts on this?
Go ahead, June.
I'm starting to see some really good things. By talking more with people, I've been pretty more. There have been people who've asked things like, "Oh, what is it that you can eat?" or "Why can't you eat pork?" or "Hey, we have non-pork items," for whatever gathering, which has been nice. But also just having people be willing to show an interest or ask questions. I think that's really key for community members. And I know, like Imam said, that he gets emails and texts, but I'm sure from other community members too, wanting to know a little bit about Islam and being able to have those conversations, I think is important. Breen and Haley donated. It got a huge donation on books. So they were giving children's books with Muslim characters to the local libraries, the public school libraries, because we don't have a lot of that. So those are some cool things too.
So I would just say what we can all do is when we hear something or when we're listening or reading, we need to be very concise about sourcing. Who's talking about Islam? Okay, is this person Muslim? Is this person studied? Who is this person? Right? Whatever information, just the very basic idea of checking sources will heal half of the issues. I swear.
As a teacher, I fully agree with that too. Yeah. Check your sources.
Well, this has been a fantastic and fascinating conversation. We're running short on time, so I do want to ask both of you, what would be your final words to our listeners after today?
I think just thanks for listening. I think it takes a special kind of person to take the time to be willing to listen to something that's different, maybe not their own, and just taking that time to be open to that. I think that's really key. Nobody's asking for your listening audience to convert right now. All we're trying to do is say, this is who we are. We're pretty normal, and those stereotypes. Do your research, check your resources, and ask somebody. But I would just say thanks for listening, because I think it does take a kind of special person just to be able to do that.
Thank you.
In terms of what do you need to know about Islam? The most essential thing is that it's a human being that believes that there is one creator who created everything. And that is the most essential part of it, is a theology, right? The theology of oneness, just like, for instance, in Star Wars, where he says, may the force be with you, this idea that all of the universe is in harmony, the sun and the moon and the night and the day, recognizing the order of the world and coming to appreciate and be grateful in that sense to that one creator. That's the essential part, right? The rest of it we can have conversations on, but that's really the meat and the bones of someone. So if someone says, I'm Muslim, that's the first thing that your mind should go to. All right, this is a person who thinks that there's one God. They believe that the universe is in harmony with itself, right? And that everything is coming from that one source, from that one energy, in a sense. And then after that, you might not meet two Muslims with, exactly the same beliefs. They might have some kind of structural components, but if you ask them about politics, or if you ask them about, different things, you get different answers, right? So to also believe that Muslims are like completely monolithic in their understandings of everything, right? It is a great ignorance. So, just recognizing that each person is an individual, right? Whether they're Muslim or not. And, you might be able to assume one or two things about them, but after that, they're a human being of their own. And that's a beautiful thing. If we can all do that, start respecting individuality in that sense, and then working to actually get to know each other as individuals, not as groups of people or parts of groups, then we can start to build the connections that heal our society.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, both of you. It's been an amazing talk, and I've learned so much from both of you. So thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. Have a beautiful weekend, all of you.